Jocelyn's facade of composure wavered slightly at James's words. She even felt a little afraid, but she quickly regained her cool demeanor. Setting down her coffee cup, she stood up from the table, facing James with steely resolve. "Is that a threat, James?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air between them. "It's a promise," James replied, his own voice cold and resolute. "You've crossed a line, Jocelyn. You've pushed me too far." Jocelyn's lips tightened into a thin line, her eyes narrowing as she regarded James with a mixture of defiance and calculation. "Fine," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "If that's how you want to play it, then so be it. But remember, James, you're not the only one with power and influence. You may think you hold all the cards, but you'll soon realize that I'm not someone to be underestimated." With that, Jocelyn turned on her heel and walked out of the room, leaving James seething with anger and frustration. He knew that things were about to escalate into a battle. He was prepared to fight, to protect what was his, and to exact his revenge on those who had wronged him. As James stood alone in the kitchen, a sense of grim determination settled over him. The war between him and Jocelyn had only just begun, and he was ready to do whatever it took to emerge victorious. With a clenched jaw and fire burning in his eyes, he strolled out of the house. He called his secretary Nick, his voice full of seriousness. "Why aren't you here yet? Do I have to wait for you?" Nick's voice crackled over the phone, betraying a hint of panic. "I'm on my way, sir. There was just a bit of traffic, but I'll be there in 5 minutes. Is everything all right?" James grunted in response, his mind preoccupied with the looming confrontation with Jocelyn. "Just come, okay? Hurry up, Nick. We have work to do." Nick arrived in no time, wanting to know why his boss was angry in the morning. As Nick stepped into James's villa, he was greeted by an atmosphere thick with tension. James paced back and forth in the living room, his brow furrowed in concentration. Without a word, James entered the car and instructed Nick to drive. In the car, everyone was silent. Nick waited for James to tell him what was bothering him, so he kept driving. After a few minutes, James sighed. "Nick, I think it's time we take our first action against the Cowles. Did you gather the information with evidence I asked you to gather?" Yesterday, when Nick arrived at the Hawkins Corporation offices, James had told him to find evidence of patient mistreatment in one of the biggest hospitals in the city owned by the Cowles. Jocelyn was appointed as its CEO and the general surgeon of the hospital. He wanted to ensure he lowered her confidence by exposing her secrets. For now, James's priority had shifted from Orga to vengeance for the Cowles. Nick nodded, his hands steady on the wheel as he navigated through the city streets. "Yes, sir. I managed to dig up some compelling evidence of negligence and mistreatment at the hospital. For now, I have 2 pieces of evidence. It's enough to put them in hot water and tarnish their reputation. You only need to tell me what to do with them." James nodded, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. "Good. So, what do you have for me? What's the first evidence?" Nick pulled over to the side of the road, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file, handing it over to James. "This is a detailed report documenting several instances of patient neglect and malpractice within the Cowles Hospital. It includes medical records and photographs of deaths caused by negligence. And the most interesting thing about it is that even though Jocelyn is now considered the best surgeon in the city, most of her failed surgical operations were due to negligence." "This is even worse than I expected," James muttered, his voice laced with fury. "I will make sure that every member of the Cowles will go on their knees, but I will not be here." James flipped through the file, his jaw tightening with each damning piece of evidence. "This is perfect, Nick. It's exactly what I wanted. So, what's your second evidence, sir? This will be her worst nightmare. A video of her ordering another surgeon to let a patient die so that his internal organs can be sold to another person. But, sir, I am afraid this person is powerful enough to retaliate after finding out that we have discovered his secret." "But, sir," What's the hurry to destroy her? You told me to wait until the company's anniversary day. James smiled, knowing what to do. Though my patience has run out. I know how cunning Jocelyn is, as does her father. As for what I told you about waiting, I have to make sure Jocelyn falls to her knees, trembling, crying, so that she will learn to respect others. About the plan for the company's anniversary, nothing has changed. I have a surprise for them. They won't know what hit them. I'll tell you what to do next. James took the file from Nick, his expression growing darker as he flipped through the pages, absorbing the damning evidence against the Cowles Hospital. His jaw clenched as he saw the photographs and read the accounts of the suffering patients had endured under Jocelyn's watch. Nick looked at his boss in a daze. Sir, how do you plan to use this evidence? Because Jocelyn isn't an easy target, nor is her family. They will try to cover everything up. It looks like you don't know me, Nick, after years of working together. I will put them in a pond, where they will drown deeper and deeper as they fight, trying to save themselves. Nick was still driving when his phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, he saw that it was Olga. They hadn't spoken since the day she had to pick up Frank from the airport. No matter how much he wanted to answer the call, he couldn't because he was sitting with the man she was hiding from right in the car. He merely looked at the phone and left it to go to voicemail. Olga only called him when she needed something, but he accepted that he was still the one she ran to whenever she needed help. Now, he didn't like to see Olga call and wait too long, but there was nothing he could do. James looked at him, noticing Nick's restlessness. Finally, he said, "Why won't you pick up your phone? It's been ringing for too long. If you're not going to take it, then put it on silent." "Oh, I'm sorry, I will." Nick quickly silenced the phone. A wave of guilt washed over him as his hands tightened on the steering wheel. Olga was someone he cared deeply about, but their relationship had become strained ever since Frank entered the picture as Olga's boyfriend. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was betraying her trust by keeping Frank's appearance in the media a secret. But he also couldn't risk James finding out the truth. He had guessed the reason Olga was calling, and he knew he had to explain that he had no part in everything that was about to unfold. James raised an eyebrow at Nick's sudden tension. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. "Yeah, everything's fine," Nick replied, forcing a smile. "Just some family stuff." James didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press further. Instead, he leaned back in his seat and stared out of the window, lost in thought. Nick's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan to resolve the growing tension between him, Olga, Frank, and James. Suddenly, his phone buzzed again, indicating a new voicemail. Nick's heart sank as he glanced at the screen, seeing that it was from Olga. He knew he couldn't listen to it with James in the car, so he made a mental note to check it later. As they continued driving in silence, Nick couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at him. He needed to find a way to reconcile his loyalty to Olga with his obligation to protect James. But with each passing mile, the situation seemed to grow more complicated. Nick's thoughts were interrupted by James's commanding voice. "Nick, pull over to the side," he instructed, pointing towards a small roadside diner up ahead. "Sure, no problem," Nick replied, grateful for the distraction. Maybe a cup of coffee and some food would help clear his mind and keep him calm. They had just passed the bakery that Olga liked. When they were together, Olga used to always stop for her favorite egg muffin. James missed everything related to Olga. He wanted to taste the same egg muffins they used to have whenever Olga stayed at his villa for the night. James told Nick that he wanted to go alone, so Nick was left sitting in the car. It was the perfect time for him to call Olga back, but when he did, no one answered. He noticed the voicemail notification from Olga's earlier call and decided to listen to it. He pressed play, and Olga's voice filled the car. "Nick, it's me. I know you're probably with James right now, but please, you have to call me back as soon as you can. It's about Frank. What did you tell him about being exposed on social media? He's anxious, Nick. Please tell us." Nick felt saddened by the fact that Olga was worried about another man the way she had never worried about him. Despite risking his career to help her, she had never shown such concern for him. But he loved her no matter what. As James stepped inside the bakery, the nostalgic scent of freshly baked goods enveloped him. The cozy atmosphere of the diner felt like a refuge from the tensions outside. James made a beeline for the counter, where a friendly waitress greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome. What can I get for you, sir, today?" she asked cheerfully. James glanced at the menu board above the counter, his eyes lighting up when he spotted the familiar item. "2 egg muffins, please," he said, excitement evident in his voice. The waitress nodded and quickly went to work, skillfully assembling their order. As he waited, the waitress seemed to recognize him. "Sir, you haven't been here in a long time and you look sad. Is everything okay?" Of course, the waitress knew who he was. He was the CEO of the Hawkins Corporation. But because she was the one who used to serve him and Olga whenever they came, James had become familiar to her because of Olga's affection. "I am fine," James replied firmly. "Well, your fiancé was here." She looked happy. "I have to admit, you have a very beautiful daughter." James didn't know that Olga was coming to have her favorite egg muffin, but he tried not to let his surprise show. "Thank you," he replied, his voice softer now. He couldn't help but think about how his family would be if he married Olga. As James savored the egg muffin, memories flooded his mind, taking him back to the days when he and Olga were inseparable. They had shared dreams, made plans, and laughed together, their love seemingly unbreakable. But life had taken unexpected turns, leading them down different paths. Deep down, he knew it wasn't entirely over between them. He thought, if I apologize and put in more effort, maybe Olga will forgive me. I just need to distance myself from Jocelyn and her family's influence for now. When I remove Jocelyn from my life completely, I will make sure Olga is mine. Olga, with her vibrant spirit and steady optimism, had always been his source of comfort and strength. Her absence in his life had left a void that no amount of success or wealth could fill. Despite the years that had passed since their separation, James found himself longing for the warmth of her smile, the sound of her laughter, and the gentle touch of her hand. Now, knowing he might have a daughter, he thought, there's no way Frank could have known Olga and impregnated her right after we separated. I remember the day I broke her heart. She was saying that she had something important to tell me. Maybe if I had listened to her that day, things would have turned out differently. James finished his muffin and rose from his seat, feeling infused with renewed hope and energy by the warmth of the bakery. He went back to the car, feeling released from his morning encounter with Jocelyn.